Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's May 25th. That makes it the 48th anniversary of the release of the original Star Wars, and unfortunately by the time you see this, it'll probably be at least the 26th, so you can't really impress your friends with that knowledge. However, I am here to come up with all sorts of other knowledge. This is time for another batch of deep space updates, and we start out with 4 different Starlink launches. On the 4th of May, we had one from Launch Complex 39A, 7th of May from Slick 40, 10th of May from Vandenberg, and 10th of May there was one from Slick 40. On to 11th of May, we had a launch out of China, a Long March 6A carrying Yaogan 40 like A, B, and C. And these are into low Earth orbit, polar orbit from Taiwan. They were believed to be reconnaissance satellites for China's military. On the 12th of May, we also had a Long March 3C/E carrying TJS-19 into geostationary transfer orbit, ultimately geostationary orbit. Now, this is a technology demonstrator launched out of Xichang. And interestingly, they skipped TJS-18. Not sure why. I'm sure you can read all sorts of stories into that. But the official word on what this satellite is for is mainly used to carry out multi-band high-speed satellite communication technology verification. But look, most people think that it almost certainly also performs military tasks such as signals intelligence. Again, we have a couple of Falcon 9s on the 13th of May, one from Vandenberg, then another from Launch Complex 39A. That one used booster 1067, which was flying for its 28th time. 14th of May, we have a Long March 2D launching something called Taikong Jishuan, which is a series of satellites in sun-synchronous orbit for a company called Ada Space. And these are the first of 2,800 satellites for an AI space computing constellation. So this is their plan. Their official statement is the 12 satellites from the 3-body computing constellation. Yeah, 3-body problem, huh? Interesting. They'll basically process data in space, and they claim that they will be able to perform 5 petabytes or 5 petaflops of operations. Petaops. It's not really clear. They call them POPs, with like terabytes of onboard storage. Also, one of the satellites apparently contains an X-ray instrument which will be able to detect like gamma ray bursts and alert systems. So this is like a piggyback payload that's carried on one of the satellites. Okay, 14th of May, Falcon 9, Slick 40. 16th of May, Falcon 9 Starlink from Vandenberg. 17th of May, back to China. Juche 2E from Jichuan, into a sun-synchronous orbit carrying the Tianyi geology satellite. There's a handful of these different geology satellites in this constellation. I'm not sure I have any other information on what they do. Finally, 17th of May, we have someone that isn't in China or America. We have Electron launching from Mahia in New Zealand, carrying QPS SAR-10 into low Earth orbit. This is the second of their 8 launches to support the IQPS's like planned constellation of 36 synthetic aperture radar satellites. 18th of May, PSLV XL launching out of India carrying EOS-9, an Earth observation satellite. It was formerly known as RISAT-1B. Now, this was intended to go to orbit, but during the 3rd stage, there was an anomaly. An observation was the official term, and we see the trajectory stopping gaining velocity, let's say. And what's kind of interesting is that it does appear to have a bump later on, roughly at the same time when the 4th stage would fire. So it's not really clear exactly what went wrong, whether they said they lost chamber pressure, but given that they almost lost all performance, it may have like spun into some sort of orientation, but then that doesn't explain why it picked up velocity when the 4th stage should have fired. Regardless, loss of this spacecraft, it was the 101st launch for ISRO. Rocket Science 101, I guess. 19th of May, back in China, Series 1S launched from its Sea Launch platform for galactic energy. Carried Tianyi 34 to 37. These are Internet of Things constellation that's in low Earth orbit. 20th of May, Long March 7A carrying ChinaSat 3B, a geostationary communication satellite launched from Wenchang. ChinaSat is mostly to provide civilian commercial users with voice data, radio, TV. There's no other details published, of course. And when there's not a lot of other details published, we assume that there's also some secret military applications in there because that's what America does, right? 21st of May, Falcon 9. Starlink, again, Slick 40. 21st of May, Connecticut 1, a return to flight. Back, it failed on 27th of December 2024. So this is a rideshare mission into sun-synchronous orbit carrying satellites for Minospace and a spacecraft called Zingri 11. Again, don't know a huge amount of those. Now, here's an interesting one. Soyuz 2.1. Okay. Now, so here's an interesting one. From Plesetsk, we had a Soyuz 2.1B with a Fregat upper stage. And this launched Cosmos 2588, which presumably a military satellite of some sort. The really interesting part is that it launched into exactly the same orbital plane as USA 338, which we know is a US spy satellite. So this is almost certainly intentional. It's almost certainly going to be performing some sort of remote reconnaissance, observing it from a few hundred kilometers away or even closer. So obviously satellite trackers will be paying attention to when these spacecraft have conjunctions. The 23rd of May, Falcon 9, Starlink, Vandenberg, and 24th of May, we had another Starlink, again, Slick 40. So, all the Falcon 9 launches were Starlink this time. But there was a SpaceX landing, and that was CRS-32, which undocked the space station and landed just off the coast of LA. And because it was on its descending leg of the orbit, it passed all the way down the west coast of the USA, and there were people near me wondering what the hell it was on the local mailing, the next door mailing lists. But yeah, down all the way, it was visible, very bright. It was surprisingly bright. I set up my camera to observe it, and I didn't quite get the calibration right. I didn't get the settings right. I was looking for like 1 second exposures, and it was totally. Could have done it faster and got more detail. Now, down in LA, we heard sonic booms, or people heard sonic booms. Vandenberg, they observed sonic booms. It may even have been heard, much further north. My neighbors said they thought they heard a boom a few minutes afterwards. I don't know, because I'd taken the photos and run inside to post them on the internet. But anyway, yeah, spacecraft returning from the space station with all sorts of science goodies, and of course taken back to port. They are now moving all their capsule landings to the west coast because the reprocessing happens in the factory in Hawthorne, so this is a faster way for them to do it. The other SpaceX sort of big news is that now we know Starship Flight 9 is happening next week. Well, times on that have been a bit fluid, but they have been approved for a return to flight because they've published their mishap report. And what's interesting is that while Flight 8 had failed at roughly the same point as Flight 7, and many of us said that indicated that the problems with the harmonic resonances had not fully been addressed. The official report is blaming this on an engine failure. They officially say that sea level engine, Raptor in the middle, allowed, fuel and propellant to escape, mix, generates an explosion, damages the vacuum engine next to it, damages the two sea level engines next to it. The other two vacuum ones survive and continue operating, but the mission is lost. They observed it spinning out of control and beginning to fall back to Earth. They lost contact with it. It was still operating just fine, but it's known then that the automated flight termination system would have triggered and caused the breakup over the sea. So, yeah, they're looking at making some changes to Raptor engine designs. They're talking about adding preload to key joints, which basically means screwing them in tighter, right? Preload is how tight your bolts are. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that, engineers, but you get the idea. So they're working on this. I mean, Raptor is, of course, an engine which is absolutely trying to push the maximum performance, and it has chamber pressures which at one point were thought ridiculous. So I could totally understand if they have failures and they need to, slowly figure out how to improve these. Anyway, there was another failure in the last few weeks, other than India's PSLV. Gilmore Space. If you might remember, they were hoping to launch from Australia, and honestly, first launches for new companies, they tend to have a habit of going wrong after they launch. Gilmore, unfortunately, they didn't even get that far, so they had an unexpected anomaly on the pad a few hours before they even started filling the fuel, the payload fairing popped open. It did a spectacular triple backflip, according to someone who was there. And that meant that they've had to ship, order another fairing from their factory, get it shipped out there, and they're going to hopefully work towards launching that again. But I do think it is kind of funny that literally this is Australia and, well, the front fell off. And I have to stress that is not normal. Yeah. Around the moon, iSpace, Hakuto R, Resilience. It has finally arrived successfully in lunar orbit. And as we speak, it has been slowly dropping the orbit down. It was on a highly eccentric orbit now, but it's dropping its apogee downwards until it will be hopefully ready to attempt its lunar landing around June 5th or 6th. I'm not sure about the exact time, but in the next couple of weeks, we will be watching that eagerly and hoping that they have some success. Unlike, if you remember, the Intuitive Machines Athena, well, they finally gave us a few more details during an earnings call on May 14th. And they basically attributed it to three different problems. First of all, the laser altimeter was generating too much signal to noise and it wasn't correctly returning their altitude. Now, we now know that it was basically hovering across the surface and slipping sideways. The reason it was slipping sideways was because the camera system was not doing a great job of tracking the terrain. And this was because they blamed this on the illumination being so different from the data that they had from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And I mean, okay, I understand that, but you kind of knew what the illumination would have been. That's unfortunate. The long shadows also confused some of the navigation. So the thing is, these kind of long shadows and low light angles are pretty much standard for lunar landings because you want to land just after sunrise, where the sun is low, so you can maximize your lunar day. Yeah, I'm hoping that they can move forwards and maybe finally get a successful landing for flight number 3. Now, coming back to more terrestrial environments, I kind of do want to mention a non-space thing. It's sort of space related, but it's interesting. Stratolaunch, they had a whole thing out where they demonstrated a second flight, a reusable flight of their Talon hypersonic research vehicle. Now, Stratolaunch, of course, was originally this giant aircraft which was supposed to launch rockets. And it was originally collaborating with SpaceX, and it was a sort of handshake agreement that Elon decided he didn't want to be a part of anymore. And then Paul Allen, who invested in the company, he died, and the aircraft got sold to somebody who wanted to make it into a hypersonics research launch vehicle. And yeah, they've demonstrated 2 flights of their Talon hypersonic testbed. And it's also propelled by a rocket engine built by Ursa Major, the Hadley engine, a 5,000-pound thrust, liquid oxygen, kerosene, closed cycle. So they do this out over the Pacific. They fly it at over Mach 5. We're not sure exactly how much because they bleeped out Mach 5 point bleep. We don't know. After that, the engine shuts down and it would glide to a landing at Vandenberg Space Force Base. So that's pretty neat that they've been able to demonstrate 2 flights of this. NASA has decided to give up on trying to get commercial partners for the Viper mission. And honestly, the deal to make Viper a commercial mission never made any sense the way that NASA was presenting it, because they basically said the commercial partner will pay for the finishing, the testing, and the launch. And when the data comes down, they have to give it for free to everyone else. So there was no real way to actually, leverage any part of this for to make it a viable, profit-centered business. And so currently, Viper is still almost finished, and we still have a launch vehicle, a lander for it, which will not carry it because that would then violate some sort of weird rules. On the flip side of missions that are being potentially repurposed, is in the last few weeks there was there's basically been a lot of interest from scientists to repurpose the Janus spacecraft. Now, if you remember, that was 2 different spacecraft which were going to ride share with Psyche and then go to asteroids from their original injection trajectory. Now, Psyche had to be delayed a year. There was no opportunities for Janus to get to target orbit, so they basically have been put in storage. But if you can't go to an asteroid, what if an asteroid is coming here, now if you know that in 2029 Apophis is going to fly really close to the Earth, well, guess what? If we have a couple of asteroid probes sitting there that could just be launched on a pretty low energy mission to get to this and fly past it before it arrives at Earth, and then Osiris Rex, which is now Osiris Apex, it will rendezvous with Apophis afterwards. That would be a cool data point, because we are actually interested in how the tidal effects of Earth will modify asteroids, because we've seen that many of these are rubble piles. So this would be a great mission. We should totally do it, and it would be cost effective. Okay, Varda. They landed their third space capsule, their research spacecraft that flies in orbit. Now, we know in the first two that they were manufacturing pharmaceuticals. They spent a month in orbit. I think they might be doing that again. It did spend a month in orbit, but the only payload they've actually talked about is an IMU that they were carrying for the Air Force to perform instrumentation tests during re-entry conditions, because that's what Varda can offer that other people can't. I think they are in fact manufacturing, but I didn't see any mention of it on this flight. Rocket Lab also had their quarterly report. We got a whole bunch of new pictures and stuff about Neutron progressing towards production, demonstration of the fairing, but in amongst all the cool new pictures of testing hardware is Rocket Lab confirmed that they have a contract with the Air Force Research Lab for rocket cargo delivery, right? Starship, sure, they're talking about their thing, but Rocket Lab also like the idea of an intercontinental ballistic mail carrier that will launch and then land somewhere on the Earth, presumably using similar technology to what Varda offers, or maybe something, or what they provided Varda, because obviously they've demonstrated the ability to build re-entry capsules. So this will be, this first mission will probably be like a test where any US government partners can just put stuff on it and manifest whatever payloads they want for this particular test. Not really clear exactly when that will launch, but given that it's a test, it could launch very early in Neutron's life cycle. Speaking of the Department of Defense, we've heard about Golden Dome the last few weeks. Well, we've now heard that Space Force General Michael Gulchin is going to lead the project, and they had like a big Oval Office meeting for this. And he's previously led, or he was being a deputy, at the National Reconnaissance Office, and he also was an executive at the Missile Defense Agency, so he's sort of well positioned for this. The other thing that came out of this was that they said that it will be delivered in 3 years for $175 billion. And nobody I've spoke to believes that for a second. It'll either be delayed, it might get cancelled, or they might have a token capability delivered for that. And, the US already has missile defense capability that has been demonstrated by the Missile Defense Agency. So, they could literally take this money and just say, we're going to buy a dozen of those and deploy those things. We're not sure what exactly is going to happen. They have said that they have decided upon an architecture, but that architecture has not been publicly announced at this time. But yeah, I think the US should actually have a missile defense system, but I'm not sure it's going to be delivered for that kind of cost. And I think if you're selling this to the American public, you should be very honest about just how much it's going to cost. Okay, Axiom 4, they are getting ready for launch. They're going to be the next crew flight to the International Space Station, a 2-week visit commanded by Peggy Whitson, and they're going to have Shubhanshu Shukla, Tibor Kapu from Hungary, and Slavoj Nzansky. I can't just say his name, but Polish guy. Poland can into space, and we're going to have someone from India. They're going to do a bunch of experiments. They're going to do video link-ups. They're going to talk about how, everyone has a place in space. So this will be also a new Dragon spacecraft, and I think that means that the crew gets to pick a name for it. If you remember, this Dragon spacecraft was supposed to be on Crew 10, but it was delayed, and they did some swapping around, and now this one is the one that's going to fly. It also ended up being delayed further, so clearly there were some serious problems with this piece of integrating this. But sort of the bigger news that came out of that press conference when they were discussing this was that NASA has long-running budget shortfalls, and they may end up having to reduce the amount of ISS crew or have longer missions for the NASA astronauts. So this is obviously going to be, this is partly in reaction to the announced budget that we've heard, which massively slashes everything at NASA. But ongoing, there were problems and pressures where, for example, the 2024 budget was cut back by pressure in Congress, and moving forwards, we're going to see even less money. And on top of that, we had the Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo vehicle. The latest one that came, it had a problem. It's not going to fly, so they're going to have less cargo deliveries to the space station this year, which is going to add further pressure to how many astronauts can be on the station, and be properly fed in the manner to which they, are accustomed, right? Okay, so Blue Origin, they had a big thing at the Lunar Surface Innovation Consortium meeting in May. They showed off the Transporter spacecraft, which was basically the fuel tanker for the Blue Moon Mark II lander. Now, I guess it's a fuel tanker. It's also got thrusters and everything on it. This thing, the whole point about this is this should be able to launch into orbit on top of a New Glenn, take any excess propellant, and it could dock with other New Glenns to fill up to 100 tons of hydrogen and oxygen. And supposedly, it's designed for zero boil-off technology. That means it will include cooling systems, radiators, thermal shields, to protect it and keep that liquid hydrogen at 20 Kelvin so that it doesn't boil off. Because if you have it boiling off, then you need to carry more, and hydrogen is really annoying to deal with. So this spacecraft, it's like a 7-meter diameter tank, same size as the tankage on the rest of the New Glenn rocket. As you can see, it has this heat shield and stuff. It also, while it's primarily for Blue Moon and the human landing system there, it could be used for anything. It could be used to deliver propellant to any part in cislunar space. They say that they could deliver up to 30 tons of liquid hydrogen and oxygen to Martian orbit. And hey, if you remember talking about Mars Direct, where you would be making methane on Mars, some versions of that say, why bother trying to find water on Mars when you can just ship hydrogen there and use that much more easily? So this is a key part of lunar infrastructure, which is why I'm very interested in it. They also announced, by the way, during this session that they would be launching their first Blue Moon Mark I lander to the moon, hopefully this year. And there'll hopefully be another Mark I before they do their bigger Mark II. But they're planning, this will carry 3 tons of cargo to the lunar surface, and it will have some NASA payload. I'm not sure which ones, but Blue Moon hopefully flying before the end of the year. So Dawn Aerospace down in New Zealand. Yes, there's a New Zealand rocket company which isn't a Rocket Lab. So they're not really building rockets, they're building rocket planes, and they have an interesting strategy. So they have the Aurora space plane. You might have seen some cool videos of this, taking off from a runway, flying up to the edge of space, and then coming back down and gliding back to a landing. Now, this is supposed to be able to carry something like 6 kilograms, maybe 15 pounds of cargo. And they are, instead of selling this as a service to test hardware, they want to sell the drones, the spacecraft. So you could potentially buy a suborbital UAV, rocket-propelled UAV from these guys. That's their hope, that there will be customers that want to buy this and then subsequently provide the service for themselves. Or maybe they just want to do really cool photography from the edge of space. I'm going to say that would be pretty neat. Of course, they'll tell you how much it will cost, I'm sure, but they won't tell you how much it will cost to license and negotiate all this stuff with the various government bodies that are involved when you're flying things supersonically straight up. So yeah, talking about, licensing and government red tape and everything, sounds like we finally have an expectation that Jared Isaacman is going to be going up for a vote before the full Senate in early June. So in the next week or so, We might see some updates on Jared becoming NASA administrator. He's obviously been posting plenty of videos since then. We're expecting Starship in the next few days or so. Hopefully success. You know, we've had a couple of failures. It'd be really nice if they could get all through their suborbital flight and then potentially land safely. And China, they are expecting to launch the Tianwen-2 asteroid sampling mission on May 28th. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.